dang it, I do that wrong every time. It's okay. Good day and welcome to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast. My name is Garrett Williamson. I'm president of Personal Edge Fitness. Thank you so much for joining us today. With me today is our exercise coordinator, Charlie Merlot. Charlie, I appreciate you being on the show with us.
Thanks for having me.
Something very near and dear to your heart and pretty much head of our athletes program here at Personal Edge Fitness. Charlie's got a background in kinesiology, and he's going to dive deep into this subject with us. But before we go to that, I want to tell you how to get in touch with the show. If you have any questions about this podcast or any others, or if you have any questions about dispelling the myths of health, fitness, and wellness, please reach out to me at area code 251-278-3343. That's 251-278-EDGE. You can also reach me at Garrett, Garrett, at personaledgefitness.com. That, of course, is our website and also our Facebook page. Hit me up on Twitter or X at Team PE. We're talking today about, as I said in the intro, something really very near and dear to your heart. I mean, Charlie works with all levels here. And what's the youngest clients you've worked with here?
Right now, 8.
8?
Yep.
Okay. All right. And most senior that you've worked with, do you have any idea?
Athlete?
No.
Or just
client?
Anybody? In the 90s. Yeah. 90s.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah. Definitely 90s. In fact, I knew who it was.
Yep.
So it works with all of them, but he heads up our athlete program here, and because he's well versed in a program we're going to talk about a little bit today, and we've actually done a podcast on called LTAD. But I was telling you about in the intro about injuries or improper training techniques that cause problems or that later in life that we associate with time passing on a calendar. And you know how I feel about that. The ridiculous concept of time passing on a calendar causing degeneration is an absolute lie. But I'm going to start this off with a quote and turn it over to Charlie here. But just to give you an idea, the one study I was reading that just take an injury. That's probably one of the most common things we see, of course, is injuries. And you deal with a lot of clients that are here, that are adult clients, that are here for general fitness, that have consideration.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, I mean, you had one just start. In fact, I was asking you about them because they needed to have somebody sub in with them yesterday. I was asking you about the particular client, and I think his is it's a knee injury. Is that correct that he had?
Yeah. Not too long ago, he had a knee deal that he was dealing with. So we've been trying to get him back to baseline, slowly working with him, trying to get him back to where he wants to be.
But it's not his main reason for coming here.
No. I mean, it's definitely one of the reasons, but he has other goals as well. Right.
Mm-hmm. And so like I said in the intro, so 72% of the people come to us for general fitness and weight loss, but a lot of them have these pre-existing conditions. But the study was talking about ankle sprains. It's from the Journal of Athletic Training. Revealed that athletes who suffered from ankle sprains and did not receive proper rehabilitation were more prone to chronic ankle instability in adulthood. And this, of course, increases the chance of falls, balance problems, what have you. That's just one study talking about an injury early in life. And actually, many of them, I've got a study about this, that haven't done the proper rehab, causing problems later. So talk to us about your experience with that.
Yeah, so for me personally, I'm an athlete. I have an athlete background, and when I was in high school, I grew up playing sports, mainly football, and then my 9th grade year, I tore my labrum in my right shoulder. And so from there, I had to go through surgery, go through the rehab process with physical therapy, and something that they often refer to in the physical therapy world, after you graduate from physical therapy, you go through something called RTP, or return to play. Right. So that idea of, it's like you graduated from physical therapy, but there's still that weird time period where you're not quite ready for sport, but you have to bridge the gap somewhere. So really, it's all about bridging the gap between physical therapy and your return to play. Right. So for me, that looked like slowly integrating myself back into the weight room, more, contact prep for football before I was really ready to take on, the demands of playing football again. And so that's kind of my story as far as from an athlete perspective of what it looks like coming back from an injury to going through the rehab process and then trying to bridge the gap back to my sport.
And bridging that gap, that's something that you've heard me say many times, you've heard me give an elevator speech on the podcast, and I talk about we do prehab, rehab, and post-rehab. And that's what I refer to as, of course, post-rehab. But that's not limited to youth or athletes by any means, right?
No, not at all. In fact, so for general population clients, like I said before, with the athletes, it's return to play.
Right.
But bridging the gap for general population is what I like to call RTL, return to life. And
Right.
so that idea of it's, you go through your physical therapy with the injury that you're dealing with. And then from there, how do I get back to being able to, lift my kids off the ground or be able to, do yard work? And it's that, okay, well, I've done physical therapy. They've got me back to baseline.
Right.
Now I need to continue the process so that I can handle my daily activities that I used to do prior to my injury. And so
Sure.
I think that's something that we specialize and do very well.
Right.
I think of several clients off the top of my head, but two in particular. One of them, she's been through 2 knee replacements.
Right. Yeah.
And we've helped her, go through prehab before and after. And so, and she said that the prehab before has made a significant difference in her recovery.
Of course.
Because, before her surgery, she was able to strengthen her muscles, work on her range of motion, do whatever she could. So that way, whenever she did have the surgery, she could bounce back even faster.
Right.
Another one I'm thinking of is a guy who came in, he had torn his Achilles playing recreational basketball. And
Right.
so, he was very limited in, what he could do as far as jumping, cutting, and he wanted to get back to playing basketball. So he had, gone through physical therapy, and he came to us because he knew he wasn't quite ready to start playing basketball and doing
Right.
those things yet. So he needed to bridge the gap. And so I think that's something that we do really well with our background in sports medicine and exercise science as well.
Well, okay. Now, Charlie mentioned he's an athlete. He's downplaying his resume. Actually, he's more than just an athlete. You played football in high school, and then also you went on after that.
I did, yeah. So played football in high school. Yeah, I got hurt and then, made a recovery. And then, I ended up getting a scholarship to Jones College in Ellisville, Mississippi. It's a junior college. And for those of you who don't know about junior college football, it is often overlooked, but a lot of studs come out of JUCO. To name a few, Stetson Bennett is a big one.
So glad you mentioned Stetson.
Yeah, got to mention Stetson. I've played with several guys who went on to play, major Division I football and a couple in the NFL. And so, I played 2 years at Jones, and we had a lot of success there. It was a really awesome time. But I got to see, more of that return to play, guys being injured and then going through the training room, getting back in the weight room. One of my big mentors to this day is my strength coach from Jones, and he's taught me a lot of, not only the return to play side of things, but also the injury prevention through the weight room. What are we doing in the weight room to try to mitigate as many injuries as possible? Okay,
and now some of this that Charlie just said, you're probably not surprised to hear that you've got he's got a name for it. It's return to play versus return to life, and somebody that has a knee surgery and having to go through prehab, rehab, and post rehab work, which of course, like we say, we do a vast amount of that here, but what we're pointing out here, and Charlie's about to make me a liar if what I've been telling you all this time is wrong, but what's the difference? I mean, what's the difference seriously between a young athlete being a 20-year-old, young athlete being a 14-year-old, and these clients that we see that are going to knee surgeries, going for RTL versus a young athlete going through RTP? What's the difference?
Nothing. Literally nothing. So
I'm poking him under the table here is what I'm doing, so he knows. So, but seriously.
Right. Everybody needs the same thing, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you only have so many movement patterns that you can train. And the difference between, like you said, a 14-year-old and somebody in their 50s is really nothing. Really, the only thing that might be different is the demands of what they're trying to do, right? So, a 50-year-old might not be trying to play football or baseball again, but there are certain demands that their body requires of them, and they need to be back to functioning in a way that they can achieve those tasks. And so for us, it's really not that different. Like we talk about a lot, it really comes down to mindset and thinking, when you are of that age, you're like, oh, well, like I'm not as young as I used to, so I can't go out and do this. And it's really, that's not true at all. it's all about your mindset and thinking, I can do this, and that's a big step, and getting
60%
through,
of it.
getting through that return to life is, realizing, okay, like I can do this. My age is not a limiting factor. It's not holding me back. It's really my mindset that's holding me back.
True, exactly. And the other parts of that, of course, you've heard me talk about all the time, is first 6% is mindset. That's the most important. And then you mentioned that Charlie mentioned that the 50-year-old may not be trying to go back and play on the baseball field. Well, it doesn't mean he can't. It just means that that's not his goal.
Sure.
So that works into lifestyle. That looks into mindset also. This is what I want to be able to do. This we have almost every single client comes to us with a different goal in some aspect.
Mm-hmm.
But the treatment is basically the same. So, but speaking about, I saw a study on this too about talking about improper rehab at a young age. Causing problems. See if I think I have it here. Yeah, a study in the British Journal of Sports Medicine highlighted the children who specialize. No, excuse me, I'm sorry. I want to get to that in a minute. That's going to talk about the training. But American Journal of Sports Medicine found that young athletes who sustain knee injuries like ACL tears were at a high risk for early onset osteoarthritis, regardless of whether or not they underwent surgery. And they related this to improper rehab post surgery. Have you seen examples of that with people that you've been training?
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah. So I mean, a lot of it can come back to going through physical therapy, and then whether they go through therapy and they don't do their at-home exercises properly, they don't follow the regimen that the physical therapist gave them, is one issue that could come up. Or after they finish PT, they just go home and sit on their butt and don't do anything. And then so all the work that they've been putting in for several months just goes down the drain.
Absolutely.
And so, it really, following up with your physical therapy is going to be huge. And I think that is something that is often overlooked by most people, is they think, oh, well, I graduated from physical therapy, so now I'm good to go. I don't have to exercise a day in my life anymore, and if you think back, whenever you had your injury, if you would have been doing things that might have helped prevent that, and not to say that some people aren't, sometimes injuries happen, freak accidents happen, but a lot of times injuries can be prevented in certain ways, whether that's through, you might have really bad movement patterns, right? Or you might have really underdeveloped posterior chain, your back muscles, your glutes. And a lot of that can lead to things like falls. It can lead to things where, your posture's not great. And so you end up, falling and tearing a ligament. There's things that can lead to injuries that are definitely manageable. And I think, being proactive and being able to prevent that is a big step, and not having to go through that process.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that brings us to the other part of this. As I said in the intro, that injury, getting injury early in life and not doing the correct rehab, and post rehab work can lead to problems later on that too many times we associate with time passing on the calendar. But I also said just improper training. And that's where improper training means a lot, but I think you've got to start with the basics. I think you've got to start with the right program, and that's where your study and your immersion into LTAD. Tell us about that. Now, this is something we did. And I'm going to have Charlie tell you about it. We actually did a podcast. We did a 4-part series, I think, on LTAD. You can go back and find it. Now, all of them have LTAD on them, a long-term athletic development. But briefly, if you would, tell us what LTAD is, because it speaks right to what we're talking about now.
Yeah, sure. So LTAD's something I'm super passionate about. And, so it's a system of training that meets the needs of what each athlete needs in their current stage of development.
Okay.
Obviously, a 10-year-old's not going to need the same thing that an 18-year-old is, right? They're still developing. They're still learning how to use their body. And so for us, we've broken down the different stages of development to what that individual needs the most during that current stage. And then, as they move along through developing, we progress them to the next stage. And that's more of a slow cooker method approach versus, a microwave approach where you just, throw the whole kitchen sink at them and just try to do everything you can, give them the most advanced training methods possible. Whereas the slow cooker method, it's going to take a little bit longer, but at the end of the day, you're going to see a more well-rounded, developed athlete.
Right.
And, that's what we're trying to do at the end of the day is, teach them how to move well and also, prevent injury as much as we can.
Sure.
And so with that, we have our first two stages, which is the fundamentals and the youth development stage. And then, so those two are really focused on learning proper movement patterns.
Right.
That's really the whole focus, other than, having fun.
Yeah, of course.
And keeping them engaged. But through fun and games, we try to teach them how to move correctly.
Right.
Because establishing a solid foundation through those stages is going to carry over, and that's going to help benefit them as they move through the later stages.
Sure. Okay. And the I see that with especially the young athletes I see you working with. In fact, you just started some folks last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And you're going through that, but not only is he doing this as an exercise physiologist, I can easily look at what he's doing and I know what that's leading to. What they're seeing is fun and games a lot. You know what I mean? And but at the same time they're doing athletic training. They're training for their eventual sport, whether they get into it now or later. And what you said about the well-rounded athlete, not only are we just preventing injuries, don't get me wrong, we're developing very, very, very strong, very fast athletes, very talented athletes by using this method. So continue on with that, though. I didn't mean to interrupt you about especially the movement and what have you. So
so I'm reading a book right now. I really like to read. I like to, just learn more information. I think that once I got out of school, I realized I enjoy reading. But when I was in school, I didn't really like it as much because I was forced to. But now
he's big time into it because I've seen the stuff he reads that don't have a lot of pictures.
Right.
I mean,
He
it's
really
only
is like
reading.
10 pages, But I like to pick the topics I like to read. And right now I'm reading a book called Atomic Habits, and I'm really a big believer in controlling what you can control.
Right.
And there's a few things that you can control in your life, and your fitness, your health is one of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so one of the quotes that really stood out to me is, your outcomes are a lagging measure of your habits. And so that idea of, the stuff you're doing now is going to carry over, whether you see it next week, a year, 10 years from now, you're going to see the outcome eventually.
Sure.
And with movement patterns, you might not notice, you doing an improper squat pattern or improper hinge pattern for a couple weeks, but over the long period of time where those movement patterns begin to develop and they begin to ingrain themselves in your mind, you might reach over and try to grab a heavy concrete block one day, and then boom, that's when it happens, and you hurt your back, and then you're dealing with that chronic issue for a long period of time.
Absolutely.
Because it all started back when you initially started doing that movement pattern incorrectly. And so that's really why we focus on that in LTAD, is because we believe fitness is for life. It's not just while these kids are training for a sport, but we want them to be able to have physical literacy that will carry on throughout the rest of their life. And so with that, if you don't try to learn these things the right way, you're going to have to try to correct bad habits. And it's a lot easier to teach somebody to do it the proper way the first time than, after they've been doing something for 10 or 20 years, and then we try to come back and recorrect, and then we have to rebuild what we've tried to correct. And so it becomes a lot more difficult. And so I think, that's a big part of it, is learning it right from the beginning. And if we're able to do that, I think it definitely makes the process a lot easier.
This is something we've seen. You've heard me talk about this when I've talked about Olympic lifting, because I'm a huge fan of it. And I do it myself. I like it. I can teach it, but I've got people that are well-versed in Olympic lifting, and a lot of people on the staff that really love teaching it. But that's when I first started training in the late 80s, early 90s. I was up against that wall that Olympic lifting was bad for you, and that's strictly because it was done improperly.
Yeah.
But that leads also to the concept you said a minute ago about one day you lean over and you pick up that cinder block or whatever. Okay, if you've done nothing but lift correctly,
Yep.
You were taught in early stages, that first stage of LTAD. You were taught these movement patterns early on. That's the only way you're going to. Even when you do it fast, that's the only way you're going to lift. I mean, that's why, of course, that's not only going to prevent injury, but it's going to build a stronger base and stronger athlete.
Yeah, you don't want to get me on my soapbox about how deadlifts are bad for your back. Me and Josh will fight that to our grave.
Right,
I think that deadlifts get a bad rap for,
Sure.
if you try to pick something up from the floor like that, it's going to hurt your back. And, it's all about proper form. And, there are ways to modify the lift if you do have a need that we need to meet, though you can still do a deadlift. You can do it from an elevated position off of blocks, or there's different ways that you can still train that movement.
But at the same time, naturally, we're not made to have to make those changes.
Naturally,
the changes that he's talking about are because somebody has lifted something improperly and injured himself. You're going to do a deadlift. We're built to do that.
Right.
We're made to do that. And you're going to do that whether you work out in a fitness facility or not, or doing Olympic lifting or not. You're going to pick up something off the floor that is heavy. And it's our daily. Our human body is made to do that. So
right. I mean, like I said earlier, there's only so many movement patterns that the human body is capable of doing.
Right.
And so at some point in your day, you're probably going to go through the majority of those movement patterns, whether you realize it or not. And so, logically, you would want to train those movement patterns in a setting that is safe and controlled.
Right.
And that way, when you do go about it unconsciously in your normal life, your body is, one, familiar with it and also prepared.
Right.
And so that is the gym, where you're in a controlled setting, where you have a professional watching over you, ensuring that you're doing it correctly. And then that way, when you do, if you do have a break in your form, we can say, oh, nope, stop.
Right.
Let me adjust that real quick. All right, now go. And so that's, I think, another thing that we do very well at Personal Edge is we're going to make sure you're doing things the proper way.
And that goes for, you heard him say at the very beginning of this, he's working with somebody that's 8 years old and worked with people in their 90s, and it's the same. It is the exact same type of training. All right, I want to touch on something because this is something you talked about in the LTAD program, and please, I highly encourage you to go back and watch those podcasts. But briefly, if you would, I found a study that was interesting about talking about. In fact, I started mentioning it earlier, but the British Journal of Sport Medicine highlighted that children who specialized in one sport and trained intensively from a young age were at a heightened risk for overuse injuries. And these injuries lead to not only immediate problems, but also problems later in life, ones that we associate with time passing on the calendar, which has nothing to do with that. In the LTAD program, you address that.
Yeah, most definitely. So part of these earlier stages in LTAD is very general.
Right.
We do not specialize at all. And the reason for that is the kids, they don't need to specialize. Their bodies are still developing the general physical qualities that they need to be good at a sport. You think about professional athlete, they're already elite in pretty much all physical areas. And so, they're fast, they're strong. It really wouldn't benefit that much to get a little bit stronger or a little bit fast. They're already so elite. And so they need to be very specialized in their sport. For kids, they still have a lot of room to grow in those general qualities. So the low-hanging fruit is to be very general and not over-specialized. And I think, and the research shows, especially with Dr. Andrews at the Andrews Institute, he just released an article trying to push back on the early specialization of youth sports. And something that a common issue that we run into is whenever an athlete is over specializing at an early age, their body has developed the skills to be very specialized, but then they can't manage the demands that they're trying to ask of their bodies, right? And so they're trying to do a very specialized skill with a very undeveloped physical body that isn't just able to withstand the demands that it's asking of themselves. And that's where you see a lot of these overuse injuries at 10, 12, 13 years old, and so it's a real issue. And I think it's just a lack of awareness. Right. A lot of parents think, well, I need to, get my kid as much exposure as possible at 10 years old. And that's when the college coaches are going to be coming at them. And,
in one sport, in one discipline, in one specialization.
In baseball. And we need to, go do all these showcases. And trust me, that is going to come one day. You just get your kid in a class like we do, or get them training very general, and just get them good at being able to move well and be able to control their body weight. And I promise at the end of the day, once they get in high school, they're going to be healthier, they're going to be stronger, and they're not going to be burnt out. And the big thing we talk about in LTAD is the early specialization of athlete often leads to burnout. And by the time they get to the point where they're ready to really focus on specializing, they're so burnt out of their sport that they're just fed up with it, and they really don't have the energy to put into that. And so I just am a big proponent of staying general for as long as possible and then specializing later.
Well, and also if you're thinking about it, most people think of the specialization, they want to specialize because they really have a goal. They want to make the high school team, college team, whatever. And so they're going to start them at a young age to specialize. Well, with their goal, unless they just, I don't know of any parent that, I have a phobia of any other sport except for this one. No, the specialization is usually done because they're driving them towards a goal in that particular sport. Well, if they're driving them towards that goal, having that generalization is far better for development. I mean, if you've got somebody playing football at a young age, very young age, and during basketball season, they're playing basketball. Well, think about not only physical development, lateral movement, quickness, first step quickness, but also the development of the cerebellum as far as balance and what have you. That's going to create a much more developed athlete. When the cross trainer shoe came out, I remember very famous had Bo Jackson doing the commercials, and he was doing all these different sports that weren't related to football, and the reason being they were pushing. Herschel Walker did ballet and to get better in football. It was that cross training. Well, you're talking about doing this at a young age when they can still, and it's fun. It keeps them interested.
Yeah, and a big proponent of the LTAD method is physical literacy, and that is exposing them to as many movements, as many sports as possible at a young age, and so that they can get a wide variety of everything. And then as they, continue to grow and develop and figure out what they're best at, then later they can specialize. But like you said, rotating back and forth between sports is going to expose them to different movements. It's going to help train their cerebellum, and also it's going to give them a break from the sport they're currently doing. And so then when they come back, they're going to be fresh. The muscles and the different movements that they were doing would be a lot different. And so then that way it's not a continually overused pattern that they're doing year long.
Right, exactly. And I like what the terms that you have for that, which is true. It's physical literacy. This is no different than in college. You don't start out in medical school classes as your freshman year. You have English, you have history, you have all the different ones, because that's going to help develop the brain, develop your thought patterns. Physical literacy is going to do the exact same thing. And then relating back to what we're talking about today, one thing, that kind of training, doing it the right way, learning those movements, that's what's going to prevent. First thing, it's going to build the better athlete. It's going to build the better person, the better body, no matter what. And then it's going to prevent injuries. And when you do have an injury, as we said at the beginning, doing the proper rehab, doing the proper post-rehab. That's probably what we're really talking about. Being aggressive, not just checking off sessions in rehab, but then going after post-rehab. Make sure you have that. And you can do that at any place on the scale as far as your age is concerned. Doesn't matter. It doesn't change. It doesn't change just because of the passing of time. And those injuries that we didn't treat the right way or improper movement patterns are what caused the degeneration that we associate with age. I'm summing it up here, obviously. So.
Right, yeah. And I totally agree. It doesn't matter where you're at, time passed on the calendar, as long as you have the right mindset, as we already said. Right. And I think, having somebody guide you through it, obviously, whether that be, your physical therapist or a personal trainer like we have on staff, that will play a huge role in your progress, and having a plan that can guide you through to get you back to where you want to be.
Right. And I tell you what, you and I could go on, that we've gone long in this podcast today. You and I could go all day on this. So that means that, of course, I'm going to have you come back and talk about this. But if you have any questions about it, please reach out to me at area code 251-278-3343. That's 251-278-EDGE. You can also reach me at Garrett, Garrett, at personalegefitness.com. Obviously, my email address, Charlie@personalegefitness.com. If you have any questions for him, that is our website, our Facebook page. Hit us up on Twitter or X at Team PE. Physical literacy, especially at a young age, but for that matter, Start where you are, at any age. Add, as you said earlier, those atomic habits. And that's what's going to help you reach your level of wellness. Thank you, Charlie, so much for joining me today. I appreciate you guys joining us. We hope to see you next time.
All right. Awesome. Yeah, that was good. Yeah, I think